Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to what might be your very last flip, right? What? How crazy is that? The year is almost over. This could be your very last flip. This could be the last time I'm talking to you through this medium. So, now, which is wild to even think about, but still. Now, the big thing about it is, though, is since it could be your last flip, I don't want to crush you with too much time. So let's go ahead and get after it. And if you do have one more flip, it'll be one teeny little baby short one going into your test, right? So let's go ahead and talk about World War II, right? So we have now officially started World War II as of class, and we have now gotten into the point where Hitler has invaded Poland, right? Now in class, we talked about a lot of other stuff too. We talked about how Hitler violated the Treaty of Versailles multiple different ways. We talked about, we reviewed Stalin and the kulaks and his rise to power and things like that. We talked about a ton of different elements that were very, very important. And we talked a big thing too about appeasement and how the Allies were just like, please, just don't attack us. And basically the entire lead up to the war was defined by this idea of letting Hitler do whatever he wanted, including annex parts of Czechoslovakia, annex all of Czechoslovakia, annex Austria, not in that order. Now, and then also final straw being the invasion of Poland, right? Now, when the invasion of Poland happens, though, on September 1st, 1939, the two fighting sides are going to be the Axis versus the Allies, right? Now, the Axis is Germany, Italy, Japan. The Allies are going to be France and Britain, because the U.S. is going to remain neutral up front, and then also because of that sneaky little Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, right? Remember one key thing getting into the descriptions of all this stuff about this war. Hitler is evil incarnate, but he's not stupid. Actually, he is stupid later, but we'll get to that point later on. Now, the bigger thing about it is, though, is he makes this agreement with Stalin that they will not attack each other and they will not aid either one's enemy as long as they leave each other alone when World War II starts and as long as they agree to split up Poland, right? So what's going to happen now is Hitler now has the ability to focus his mobilized army on France and Great Britain. And so who is he going to attack first? Did he learn anything from World War I? Well, yes, he did, in fact, right? So because Hitler was not an officer, but a non-commissioned officer, Lance Corporal. Now the biggest thing about it, though, is Hitler was a member or a fighter or a soldier in World War I. And the biggest thing he wanted to avoid, make sure you know this is very important, make sure that you know that they wanted to avoid another trench warfare and another stalemate, right? Trench warfares and stalemates do not lead to any kind of conquest or land taking over ring. So in the process of all this stuff, what's going to end up happening is Hitler is going to utilize a method known as the Blitzkrieg, right? So now the Blitzkrieg now is a very, very, very important thing because that is going to be what's known as in German as the lightning war, right? Blitz meaning lightning and Krieg meaning war, right? So the big thing about it is, what is a lightning war? How is a lightning war going to actually make sure we don't have a trench war? Well, it all has to do with how you attack, right? The Blitzkrieg is focused on quick, fast, immediate strikes using heavy amounts of artillery, tanks, and large mechanized vehicles, also including bombing raids by Air Force, right? So that right there is, of course, that Hitler is using his Luftwaffe, right? Luftwaffe, the air guns. Now, he is actually using those planes to do bombing raids and to destroy and cripple cities as much as he possibly can to avoid a trench war. So much more of this war is focused on the urban element of Europe. Now, their big thing about it, though, is that the Blitzkrieg is going to be insanely effective because it doesn't actually, cause only physical damage. But we'll get to that here in a second. It's extremely effective mostly due to the fact that they practiced it, right? So the thing about it is the Germans and the Italians practiced this Blitzkrieg method to avoid a trench warfare in Spain in the early 1930s. Some of you are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, are you jumping backwards again? Yes, I am jumping backwards again. So in the early 1930s, there was this guy named Francisco Franco who was a fascist dictator who was rising to power in Spain. And that's actually going to cause a Spanish civil war. And to practice the Blitzkrieg methods and to aid in the rise of a fascist ally, and also probably to keep them out of World War II when it does start, because they don't want to necessarily have Spain and France attacking them. So what's going to end up happening, though, they're going to use their artillery, their weaponry, their air forces to bomb and berate the enemies of Francisco Franco in his rise to power during the Spanish Civil War. Now, this right here is a very, very famous painting by Pablo Picasso, right? Picasso did this piece and it's called Guernica. And Guernica is supposed to depict one of the bombing raids done by a German Air Force unit on a city in Spain during the Spanish Civil War called Guernica, right? And as you can see, it is in typical Pablo Picasso style. It's in postmodernist abstract style. But as you can see looking at it, look at all the wretched faces and the faces of pain like all over the place, like right here and right there. And this burning building with this person like leaping out of it and stuff like that. Guernica is a great example of, one, the Spanish Civil War and the Blitzkrieg methods used there, and then also the fact that the Blitzkrieg does not only cause physical damage, right? Yes, it destroys cities. It wrecks a lot of things. It kills people, right? But it also causes psychological damage and weakens an enemy's will to fight because it's destroying where they're from. The Blitzkrieg is also focused on civilian targets, right? The Blitzkrieg method would be used to bomb cities that were full of regular people because did Hitler and Mussolini care? Not even a little bit, right? So the big thing about it, though, is know that Blitzkrieg method. Know that physical and psychological damage and all those things like that. It's very, very important. But also, it's very important that you understand that Hitler's armies and Mussolini's armies are moving fast, right? They are going quick and they are taking over a lot of land very, very quickly. And so from September to April, they're going to be mobilizing their militaries and preparing them for the biggest Blitzkrieg attacks of the entire war. But now looking over into the eastern side, because we do have another member of the Axis powers, it was Germany, Italy, and Japan. So what's going on in the Japan theater or the Pacific theater, right? So something that you need to understand, write these two things down. They're very, very important. There are two theaters to this war, right? Theater as in like places that they're happening, right? There is a European theater, which is involving Hitler and Mussolini and all their stuff with the Blitzkrieg methods going on in Europe. And then there's a Pacific theater, which involves all the stuff going on with Japan, right? So now in the Pacific theater, Japan is beginning to invade the surrounding islands and Asian countries all the way around their island, right? So they are pushing further into Chinese Manchuria and then also in through Nanjing, and they're also invading China further, but also trying to take over places like Guam, possibly the Philippines. They take over Vietnam and many other areas as well. Now, refocusing, though, back on the western side of this thing, what is Hitler's goal? Like, what does he want? What is his method? What is his grandiose idea in doing all of this stuff? Well, a big thing about it that he said, which is really stupid, it's a terrible idea and it's really dumb, but what he said is that he wanted to increase Lebensraum. Lebensraum is also known in German as living space, okay? Notice, remember we talked about this before we started this Prezi, that I have words in red, and oftentimes they might be German words, and so you need to be able to write down the translated German word and what it means, because I don't want to write the entire definition. This is one of those moments. I hope you're not muting me. Now, the big thing about it, though, is Lebensraum is living space, right? Because Hitler genuinely believed that the area within Germany was overcrowded by Germans, right? And he believed that Germans needed more area to live, right? So looking at this like advertisement right here, it literally says the German living like room or the German area to live is 2.5 times, or like, excuse me, the German living people have 2.5 times as many consumers than France or Germany in that sentence, right? So what he's getting at is he's saying like, look how small France's population for the land that they're on. Look how small England's population for the land that they're on. And look how many Germans live on this amount of land. But here's the thing. This is a stupid idea, and these population statistics were never proven, and it actually makes no earthly sense. But basically what he wanted to do was he wanted to expand the German Empire, and everything he took over, he wanted to repopulate with German people, right? So, for example, this is Poland. He wanted to push all the Poles out, possibly kill all the Polish people, and then tell German people, oh, you can go out there now and you can settle on that land, right? So basically he wanted to expand the amount of land that the Germans had, and he wanted to resettle Germans all over it. What does that mean that happens to the people that already live there? A lot of times what his idea is that they would be turned into basically serfs or servants to German people after like going through literacy tests, and if you were smart, you were more likely to be dead because they didn't want you to do an uprising against the German people. We'll talk more about Lebensraum and stuff like that in class and go over it a little bit, but it's that concept of living space, right? That's what he said he wanted. He was like, oh, this is too small for me. I need more space. What an idiot. Now, so anyway, though, Germany is going to expand fast. Something that you need to understand about the earliest phases of World War II is that Germany moves quick, and so does Italy. Their Blitzkrieg methods are extremely effective, and they take over Norway, Denmark, Sweden, within the first couple of months of this war, very quickly using several strategic Blitzkrieg strikes against those areas, and they fall and crumble and surrender to the German powers almost immediately. They take over the Netherlands, they take over Belgium, they take over all these different areas, not Switzerland though. But the big thing about it though is they're taking over all this different stuff. And then Hungary and Romania later on are going to join up with them. So they're growing extremely fast. And in the early phases of this war, the Germans and the Italians are winning in a big way, right? But then this is a big moment, right? Not a turning point, but a big moment. Notice what I said. It's not a turning point, but it's a big moment. And the big moment is in May 1940, which is like just not even a year after like the invasion of Poland, Winston Churchill is going to be elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, right? Winston Churchill, who is considered the man that led the United Kingdom through this war, who had been an open basher of Hitler for a long time, for years before all this stuff ever happened. Winston Churchill was in Parliament being like, this guy's going to do something dumb and we should stop him. And then all the other allies were like, no. And he was like, we don't stop him. He's going to expand. And then, no. So no one wanted to listen to Winston Churchill. But now they want to listen to Winston Churchill because Winston Churchill is now being elected as the prime minister of their parliament, which is basically equated to like the president of the United Kingdom. Now, looking at the entire thing as well, Winston Churchill has a military background. He was a minister of the defense, and he understands how wars are fought. The thing you need to understand about him, though, and why he's so important, is because he is not going to allow Britain to surrender in this war, right? Let us go forward together. He is a very, very, very intense figure. He said at one point when he was being elected, all I have to give you is my blood, sweat, toil, and tears, right? Because he's a lot like an Otto von Bismarck, right? He is just a man that understands military practice, and he understands how to get things done, and he's an effective politician, right? He said, we shall never surrender, which is his biggest importance, right? Without the leadership of Winston Churchill, Britain might have lost this war pretty early on, but Britain is going to stay in this fight because of guys like him, right? So now let us go forward together, but something that you need to understand is even Winston Churchill was sweating for a minute when Germany overwhelmed France, right? Remember, the only two allies that are fighting against Germany and Italy right now are France and Great Britain, because Russia is in the background playing patty cake and not trying to fight like Hitler whatsoever. But Germany is going to ridiculously overwhelm France all at once, right? And it happens at this thing known as the invasion of Dunkirk, right? Now, keep in mind and remember, it takes a long time to mobilize your military. To mobilize your military completely, you need months and months and months on end. And Britain had just begun mobilizing their military, along with the French as well, when then out of nowhere, they were overwhelmed by a massive Blitzkrieg attack by the Nazi Germans, which is the flags represented right there, right? So the Germans are going to overwhelm the British forces and the French forces at this place called Dunkirk, right? In May of 1940, right after like Winston Churchill was elected prime minister, the Allies had their most crippling defeat, right? And they had to evacuate several 100,000 soldiers off the beaches of Dunkirk because the unprepared British and French military were completely overwhelmed by a massive German force. And the Brits and the French had to evacuate over 360,000 of troops from the beaches of like Dunkirk. Now, this event occurred, known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, though, which is a very, very important thing because, like, all of a sudden, during the middle of the Nazi attack, when they actually cornered every single, so look at what they're doing. They're outflanking the British and French forces and forcing them towards the sea and towards the towards the English Channel, right? Now, this moment, at the very beginning of this fight, the Nazis could have actually destroyed this entire British and French force, right? Could have destroyed these armies that were their enemies at the time. But all of a sudden, the Nazi attack just stopped, right? Like, so they came up to this area, they stopped right here on the edges of the battle lines, and they just stopped advancing, right? Which is a very weird moment in history, because if you have them in your clutches, why would you not just go after them? Some historians believe that the Nazis actually didn't finish their attack because a lot of them were coming down off of drugs. So apparently the Nazis were taking a form of meth, like in a pill form, and there's actually a book that's out about it right now that I'm reading this summer that I'm very excited about. It's called BLITZED, and I'm putting a picture of it up right now, which apparently talks about how literally the Nazis were on drugs and that they might have been coming down off those drugs during this evacuation and during this fight. So what's going to happen at the miracle of Dunkirk, though, is a bunch of British civilians are going to sail over the English Channel in regular boats, fishing boats, yachts, personal boats, canoes, like kayaks. They're going to literally go over there and help evacuate all the men off the beaches. But remember something for a hot second. If you now just took 360,000 British and French troops out of France, is that leaving much standing in the way of Hitler and his armies at this point? No. And so what's going to happen right after Dunkirk is Germany and Italy are going to go after Paris, right? So like now, because they are in the northern sector of France and Belgium right now, and they're going to turn south and start heading down towards Paris. Britain was unable to assist the remaining French army because of the terrible onslaught at Dunkirk, right? Because of their evacuation at Dunkirk and because they were unprepared, they could not help the French army, fearing devastating losses. The Nazis are going to push south, and this is bananas. But y'all, in June 22nd, 1940, France surrenders to the Nazi Germans, right? Like so. France just surrendered. Here's literally a picture of Hitler taking like an Instagram picture in front of the Eiffel Tower. Like no big deal, just on vacation. Like literally, France surrendered to Germany within less than a year of the start of this war, which means that there's one ally left in this war. It's just Great Britain. That's it. As of literally, as of June 22nd, 1940, there's one ally left. Just Great Britain. Now, why did this happen? Why were the Nazis able to just take Paris and then the rest went away? It's because you have to understand something very important. There are two parts of France that you need to understand. There's Vichy France, and then there's northern France, right? So like now, northern France is this area up here, which includes Paris, and Dunkirk is right there, right? So that's where the Nazi attack on Dunkirk happened against the British and French unprepared forces, and they pushed them all out into Great Britain, where now they're all mostly like refugees in Great Britain, right? So they then hooked south and head towards Paris, takes over Paris. Northern France was taken over by the Nazis and occupied by them. Southern France, though, was known as Vichy France. Vichy means free. What had happened is that southern France turned on northern France and told the Nazi Germans, hey y'all, we'll surrender immediately as long as you don't occupy us, and we'll even help you in the war. I am not kidding when I tell you this, that northern France tried to fight the Nazis and southern France gave in and literally helped many of the Nazi Germans in their World War II strikes. This is ridiculous. So what you had in France is they're now taking over, and the Vichy Free French are now joining the Nazi military. This looks as though literally it's unwinnable at this point. Because not only, if Hitler takes over France, not only does he get the land in northern France, but he also gets all of France's colonies in West Africa. So he gets a huge chunk of Africa as well, because the French controlled that area. So he is expanding at an alarming rate. A bunch of Vichy French soldiers are going to fight with the Germans, and now the only ally left is Britain. And Russia is still refusing to fight. This is insane, y'all. This is crazy. Many of y'all probably had no idea that this is how insanely effective the Blitzkrieg methods were at the very beginning of this war. Many of y'all probably have no idea, or had no idea, that in a big way, like Hitler and Mussolini were winning this war outright from the very, very get-go, right? They were taking over so much of Europe. It's crazy. Like, look at this map. Look at this map. Like, everything in light brown or brown is something controlled by Hitler and his allies. Look at all that. Look at all that. That's crazy. And it's supposed to be Sweden, or like Sweden's also supposed to be controlled by them because this map is a little bit wrong. But like, look at all this stuff that they are controlling. They took over that much stuff in less than a year, right? Now, the only ally that's left to fight them and try to like fend them off is, of course, Great Britain or the United Kingdom or whatever you want to call it. The guy, of course, leading them, again, is Winston Churchill. And what's going to happen is Hitler is very aware of the geography of Great Britain. And they are his next strike, right? And he knows that there's no way that he's going to land a force in Great Britain. Why can he not land a force in Great Britain? Because they have one of the strongest navies in the entire world, right? Other reason why is because it's a small, densely populated island. If you land on the coastline, they're going to eviscerate you, right? So he decides to do a different thing. And he goes the route of this thing known as the Battle of Britain. And the Battle of Britain was when the German Air Force began a massive air raid campaign, bombing the daylights out of Britain, targeting churches, monuments, factories, schools, parks, playgrounds, all these other areas, and the Battle of Britain would last nearly July, August, September, October. About 4 months where literally most of the large cities in Great Britain would be destroyed in massive Blitzkrieg bombing raids. Now, most of these citizens, to stay safe when they were being bombed, would actually go into the subway tunnels. They would actually run down into the subway tunnels and hide and hunker down and wait for the bombing raids to end, where they would then actually come back up and out. And Winston Churchill said the entire time, "We will not surrender. We will not give in." And so Hitler kept trying and trying and trying and bombing and bombing and bombing. And then they're also gobbling up new territories. They're going to officially form and adopt Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria into their alliance, as you can see right here. And they're also going to never take over Britain, right? So the Nazi Germans and the Italians never take over Britain. A lot of that is due to, of course, Winston Churchill and his inability or not wanting to ever surrender, right? So Hitler could have just sat there. He could have rested on his laurels, and he could have been like, you know what? I took over France. That was a big reason. They were like the number one person that I wanted to take over. I took over Poland. I got that. I did all this stuff. I am a dictator that now controls all this area. Maybe I should just be happy with what I have. But Hitler is a menace, and also apparently he's taking drugs. So now the biggest thing about it, though, is in the long run, he could have just sat there. But then he does the stupidest thing you could have possibly done. Forever how intelligent this man is, even though he is, I'm going to say this for the 1,000th time, he is the most evil person in history that I have studied outside of Pol Pot and Stalin, right? So he is a terrible, god-awful person who is probably somewhere very bad right now, that being ripped apart limb from limb as he deserves, right? But for the military tactics that he used to take over all that area up to this point, he then does the dumbest thing he could have possibly done because he's an idiot and he doesn't open a history book. What do I always tell y'all? If you ever become a dictator of Europe, don't do this one thing. Don't go off and invade Russia, right? So what Hitler's going to do in 1940 is he's going to decide to pull a fast one and invade Russia. He breaks the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact with Stalin, and he tries to invade Russia in June of 1941. What an idiot. Why would you do that? That is so dumb. No one invades Russia. They don't lose. Just don't do it. Winter is really bad there, I've heard, right? This is a massive turning point of this entire war, because this begins his downfall and begins his losses, right? Because the Allies from this point are going to start to push back on him, right? So the thing about it is, you have to understand the only reason why he was never able to take Russia in this thing known as Operation Barbarossa, where he actually took over a massive area of land up front. So you see this giant thing in pink right there? Thousands of square miles. He actually took all of that over in the very beginning of his invasion of Russia, which is a very, very intense targeted attack on Russia, right? The Soviets were able to hold the Germans up outside of key cities like Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad, right? Now, the thing about it, though, in the long run is Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad would be attacked for several years by German armies, and they would never quit, and they would never surrender, and they would never give up. And the thing about it is, in these attacks, when these cities were being attacked by the Nazi armies and by the Italian armies, Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad would lose millions of civilians, right? 26 million Russian citizens died at the hands of the Axis powers during this invasion, which is the same number of soldiers from Russia that died in World War II altogether, right? So you've got 40 million people dead in Russia because Hitler decided to try and invade them, but they would never surrender, right? Something key to remember here. Britain and Russia never surrendered. And so now Britain has another ally in this war, right? Russia is going to come in because this is a massive turning point. Because even though they were able to take over a large swath of land, and even though they were able to do all these things, the Russians never surrendered. And don't forget, winter is coming, right? So, like, winter's on the way. You're not going to be able to take over the Russians during that time. Also, on top of everything else, when the Nazis would take over these areas, they would place a lot of Russian soldiers in the concentration camps along with the Jewish people that they were actually doing this to during the Holocaust period, right? This right here is Heinrich Himmler, one of the leaders of the SS, or the German forces, and that is a Russian soldier, right? So now the thing about it is, though, is this is a big deal because then, out of nowhere, Germany's worst nightmare happened, and the U.S. was attacked at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and we are going to get involved in that war now. And we're going to stop right there with the big why, and we're going to talk a lot about the ending phases of this war in class, and we'll see if we have a flip, and like I said, if we do, it's not going to be a long one, right? But I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all are doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Y'all have a good one.